You guys. Just yesterday morning, I was north of here in the city of Lansing, spending time with my goddaughter, my niece Charlotte. She received her first communion yesterday morning. So this is a big weekend for our family as well. So what an exciting day for you guys. It's an awesome thing. This moment for you guys, the reception of Jesus and Holy Communion, it's included as a part of this story in this morning's gospel too. The story of the road to Emmaus is sort of finished. It's sort of the great punchline of this is that moment where Jesus offers himself to the two disciples, right, in the breaking of the bread. Such an incredible story. Such an important story. I know of no better incident, no better story in the Gospels if we want sort of a succinct master class on how Jesus moves us in our lives from a place of pain and suffering to a place of healing and mission. Everything that is included in sort of the steps of discipleship are included in this one story, the story to the road of Emmaus. So if you'd like to understand your life, it's good for you to understand this story because your life has everything to do with this story. The story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus begins with them walking along the way, and they are discussing with each other about what topic? Well, basically about whatever is most important in their life. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about what's important to them. The first thing to keep in mind about this story of them and about you is that Jesus loves to know what is important to you. Whether you think it's big or small, whether you think it matters or not, if it's important to you, it's important to Jesus. Jesus comes up alongside these two disciples as they speak about what is most affecting their lives at that moment. Now, something we notice about what they're speaking about is a sort of a common occurrence to us, which is this, that what is marking your life most deeply, what you probably spend the most mental and emotional energy on, or what might be most obvious to you, or most time-consuming or emotionally consuming to you, are the things that were the same in their lives, which was the important things that were paining them, the things that they were struggling with. We often sort of operate on those. Those sort of go around in a hamster wheel more easily than other important things in our lives. And so Jesus loves to be in the thick of that. It's important to note that Jesus wants to be where people are suffering. He wants to be with people when they're walking through that journey, and this is where he meets these two disciples. He's already aware of the entire scope of how this is going to go down, because where he meets them in this place of pain and suffering is going to be transformed into healing and mission. And healing and mission is where he wants all of us to end. He's aware that we all have to go from point A to point B. And so he meets us at the beginning of that journey as he met these two disciples. And the first move that Jesus makes is he simply asks them the question, what are you talking about? That question is very important because what is going on between them, he invites them to direct that to a third party towards God. He does this especially with things that make us suffer, the things that make us pained. There's an important piece to this. And it's the reminder that when we're going through whatever hard thing we're going through, Jesus invites us to direct that to God. And a good way to do that is to simply put his name at the end of every sentence. It's a great way for us to simply direct that to God. I really wish that I would have gotten that promotion at work already. God. It's making my financial life really difficult right now. God. I've been praying for my children to return to church for the last 30 years. God. I'm not sure why my marriage is struggling so much right now. God. Think about any important thing in your life that is on your mind. I don't know how we're going to make it through this next year without Grandpa. God. You see, the reality is that when Jesus walked along them in their life with their pain prevented them from seeing Jesus in their midst. It's a great lesson about pain in general. Pain can prevent us from seeing God, even if God is walking alongside us, just like it happened in their lives. It's sort of like the rain clouds that come and cover the sky and that covers the sun that we normally would see. And we know that the sun is behind the clouds even if we can't see it, except when the clouds stay around and it rains from now and for the next 3 years. And if it just rained straight for the next 3 years, we might start to wonder whether we even ever saw the sun before. We're like, man, it's been so long since I felt the warmth of the sun on my skin. Is I making it up the whole time? We lose sight of it. And so if you've ever had that experience in your life where you've been going through something hard and you're like, where the heck is God? Why isn't he showing up? It's just the nature of pain. Welcome to Emmaus. It doesn't mean that God's not there. It might just mean that we can't see him. But nonetheless, God walks with them and he invites them to present that important thing to him. He just says, hey man, just tell me everything. And what we find out is that they do it from A to Z. They don't leave out any of the details. And this is the next step in that journey. They say everything that there is to God about whatever it is that's important to them. And they give the full story. They spill all that tea, just like Jesus asks all of us to do. He says, I want to know every single last detail. Don't be afraid about leaving anything out. And so they move through that place of giving everything over to God, and then God makes his next move, which is that they fall silent and God begins to speak. Because when we give to God our suffering, and we give to God that important thing in our hearts that's troubling to us, he needs to be able to speak to that. Because something really difficult about our suffering is that we don't know why the heck it's happening. It doesn't make sense to us. But Jesus reveals to them the same thing he reveals to us, as Jesus responds with this really strange sentence. He says, wasn't it necessary? You tell me all about your heartache, and Jesus then says, was it not necessary? There's a kind of necessity to suffering which is of great mystery to us. Jesus somehow thought that suffering was necessary in his own life. And so he spends time talking to those two disciples about why it was necessary that these things occurred to him. Because it wasn't that the suffering in itself was something that was unavoidable or necessary. It's because the necessary part of suffering was the glory that was going to come to God through it. The way that God was going to raise it up and turn it into something good. You see, God is not the cause of evil in your life or mine. And he's not the cause of sin in your life and mine. And he's not the cause of death in your life and mine. But all of these important and especially difficult, hopeless things, he allows these things to happen because he knows that they are part of the ark. Because he needs us to get to this place of mission. He needs each of you and I to understand the meaning and the purpose of it all so that it can be transformed in him. And if the disciples didn't understand why this happened to happen and why this needed to happen in his life, how important do you think it would be for him to elucidate that in their own lives? There are parts of your journey and my story that we are unable to find out unless God himself speaks into it and shows us a deeper meaning underneath it so that we can understand what God was doing in the midst even of that suffering and in that hardship. And as he moves them through that journey, they get to this important point, which I think is the hinge of this entire story, maybe the most important step on that journey of discipleship. And it's this sentence. Jesus gave the impression that he was going on farther. Jesus came to the moment where he was sort of like done talking about it. The important thing was given over to God, and God taught them more deeply about how to understand it. And then at a certain moment, he makes this move, and he sort of steps one step away, not because he's moving away, but because he's inviting them to a different and a deeper kind of surrender. It's as if he was asking, all right, are we going to keep talking about this, or are we going to do something about it now? Jesus wanted a deeper kind of surrender. This is a really important part in our life's journey that we have to pay attention to when we feel like that's happening, when we feel like God might be taking a quick step away. And it's not because he's moving away, it's because at this point he's done in our lives the same thing he did in their lives, which they themselves said. They said, weren't our hearts burning? When all of that stuff was surrendered to God, when all of it was explained to him, when he taught us about the meaning, the deeper meaning of it all, it creates a hunger inside of us, a need inside of us, something more that's got to happen next. We feel like it's not complete yet. And so Jesus gives this impression that he's going on, and they're like, no, stay. We really want you to come into the house now. Into those four walls that nobody enters into unless you allow them in, unless you open that door for them, unless you dine with them, which is your choice, not God's choice. And he invited them to make that choice, and they did. And they let Jesus into that moment, and they fully surrendered that to him and he to them. And you have to keep in mind that this is, after all, Easter Sunday, this story, the day Jesus resurrected. 3 days ago was Holy Thursday. And so when Jesus broke bread with them, they noticed this is the same thing that happened 3 days ago. And what happened 3 days ago? Did Jesus just serve them some bread and some wine? That's not what happened. What happened 3 days ago is that Jesus gave to them the fullness of his own life. He said, this is all of me. He left nothing back. This is my body. This is my blood. I give you my whole life. The giving of the life and the receiving of the life. It's an exchange that happens in that moment. The giving of a soul, the receiving of a soul. It's exchanged in that moment, in the Lamb's Supper, in the Holy Eucharist. It's the wedding feast. It's why, for example, when you have your first Holy Communion, you wear a white dress. Not just because white looks nice, but because it's a wedding garment. What happens on your wedding day? You exchange a life for a life, a soul for a soul. Everything is given over, nothing is held back. That's what happened in that moment when Jesus broke bread with them and he said the words and he blessed the bread. He took all of the things that was given to him and he turned it into an exchange of life so that where there was death and suffering, they were able to have that transformation and that healing that they needed. It was in that moment that they realized, oh my God, in a holy way, oh my God, he was walking with me the whole time and I didn't even know it. He was revealing to me deeper things about my life and about my suffering, and it made me hunger. And in this place where he finally leads me to sort of draw out of myself and give myself to him instead of holding on to it for myself, in the full surrender of that to him, he changes it, he heals it, he transforms it. And in that moment of transformation, the trajectory of their lives changed. It wasn't just a good memory. They didn't just go back and said, man, we had a great time with Jesus. You know, it was a great couple days. Weather was awesome. We took a lot of pictures together. It was amazing. We're going to have it as a great memory. And we're going to keep going on our merry way. No, what happened was their feet were moving this direction, and then all of a sudden they were moving in the opposite direction. Their souls were going in this direction, and all of a sudden their souls were going in an opposite direction. Transformation of life. And in the transformation of their life, their mission became abundantly clear to them. What I'm supposed to do next all of a sudden is obvious to me. It was so obvious to them, they turned around in that exact moment and they walked 7 miles right back in the dark to the people that they were just with that morning. For what purpose? To tell those people what Jesus did. That's what we call evangelization. Tell people what Jesus did. Tell people what Jesus did to transform my life. To turn the things in my life that were painful and discouraging and suffering, how he walked with me through that journey, how he changed a thing in me, how he made me truly different, and now I can testify to it to other human beings. All of the steps on that journey were necessary for those disciples, because this is how Jesus moves us from point A to point B, from a life of hopelessness, from a world of hopelessness to a life of hope, to a world of hope, to a transformation where God's resurrection really means something to us, where people don't just look at it and say, oh, that's nice, but that people personally encounter it and it changes them. And here's the reality of it. Here's the importance of it. It wasn't just that their lives changed, it's that real live human beings had real lives that were changed, transformed by God, and they went back and they told people about it, and because they did, the whole world changed. It wasn't just that they changed, it's that the world changed. How do we know that the world changed? Because their lives changed? You're sitting here 2,000 years later, and we're still talking about it. Why do you think that happened? Because it was just a nice story? Or because there was something much more profound that was unfolding? It wasn't the purpose of Jesus just to come, live an earthly life, be crucified on a cross, rise from the dead, go to heaven, and then let us hang out for another 2,000 years while he was twiddling his thumbs. It's because God has a mission for you, every one of you, and me. God has a mission in your life. It's what it looks like when we get to here. But in order to get to the mission, in order for us to understand, in order for us to know what's obvious for us to do next, we have to walk every single one of these steps along this journey. They are the marks to Emmaus. They are imprinted all over your life right now. All of us. You're living this story of the gospel. And the question is, do you and I recognize that unfolding? Are we aware of the places in our lives that are moving from A to B? And what part of the journey are we on? Because there is no possibility for us to really skip any single one of those steps. They happen in order for a very specific purpose. If we aren't aware of what's important in our lives, can God transform us? No, he can't. If we don't take those important things in our lives and start to talk to God about them, can he transform it? No, he can't. If we don't give God every single detail and leave nothing out, can God transform the fullness of it? No, he can't. If we don't quiet our hearts and our minds at a certain point and allow God to speak to us about ourselves in ways that we would not be able to know unless he said it, would we be transformed? No, wouldn't happen. If we didn't get to the point where Jesus draws back in order to draw us forth into a deeper surrender, can he transform that? He can't. And if we don't take him up on that offer, can he transform it? He can't. And in that exchange, when we finally get to the place where the fullness of our lives and our souls for each other are given and received, does the transformation finally take place? Yes. And then what? It all makes sense. And your mission becomes suddenly clear to you and obvious, like the light of day that's been hiding behind those clouds for so long. But all of these places, all of these parts, we have to walk through all of them. Sometimes in life, we just walk around here and here and here, and we just keep telling God about it, and we're like, why isn't anything changing? And he's like, well, because we have to get to the next step. Sometimes we feel like, God, I've told you everything, and I'm really just ready to surrender this now. How come it hasn't changed yet? And he might be saying, we're not there yet. There's still things I need to teach you first. Are you willing to listen and wait? Any number of things can be unfolding in your life or my life, but all of us are on this path. All of us are walking this journey, and I think it's the greatest challenge and invitation that we have, is to understand how important and, in fact, how necessary that is for you. And the reason that it's necessary for you and for me is because our mission isn't just something nice that's happening in our lives, it's something that's going to change the whole world. I mean, let's put it obviously before us. What do you think would happen if everybody in the world began to spread the gospel like we spread rumors? What if through our prayerful intercession we began to drop grace upon the world like we drop bombs? What would change if everybody in the world gazed on God in prayer for as many minutes a day as we gaze at our screens? If everybody started to live that way, how would the world change? Man, it would change tomorrow, and you know it. So do I. And when we put it in those kind of terms, it becomes really obvious to us. But I hope that becomes a deeper understanding and an encouragement of how much your life matters. And how everything that you're going through, especially those things that are important to you, especially those things that are tough for you, especially those things that we don't know why they're happening and we don't know why God hasn't shown up yet, it's all part of the plan, and you're walking it. And as Jesus brings you and I to that place of healing and of transformation, it isn't just our lives that are going to change, it's the whole world that's going to change.